Hi, my name is Kara, and today I'm going to show you how to knit my Better Day sweater, which is a big striped mohair sweater, and it's completely seamless. So this is a walkthrough for my Better Day sweater, so to get these specific numbers and instructions, you can buy the pattern, and if you use code YouTube, you can get 15% off the pattern, and you can get it on my Etsy, my Ravelry, and my website. Thank you so much for supporting me and my patterns, and if you have any other questions at the end, please let me know. So today, my sweater is knit in hip knit shot fluff yarn in brown, I'll put it in the description, and Wool Knit-Eng Take Care Mohair in winter white, and I held both of these double. And so I actually have a few skeins here. This is a different color obviously, but it's the same brand of yarn. And so both of them are about 78% mohair, 13% wool, and 9% polyamide, so they're very, very similar, and I love both of them. They're both Aran weight yarns, so they're 50 grams per 100 meters. And so this pattern is actually intended for a super bulky weight yarn, but I like to hold it double because it's kind of hard to find a super chunky mohair. There is Loopy Mango Mohair So Soft, but I like to experiment with a lot of different colors, and so a nice hack I like to do is I like to hold these double. The hip knit shot fluff yarn is mostly available in Europe, but you can get it shipped to you pretty easily. Like, I sometimes order it on a Monday and it comes on a Thursday. It might be because I'm in New York and things are easy to get here, but it's not too difficult to get, and I love all of their colorways. And Wool Knit-Eng is available in the US, so it's pretty easy to get your hands on. So this is a walkthrough for the pattern, but I've also figured out ways that I've kind of gotten lazy with the pattern and modifications that I like to do. So I thought that I would tell you what modifications I've done for the pattern, because I think I've knitted about 4 times now, maybe 5, I think 4. And there are ways that I'd like to cut corners and modify the pattern since I've written the original, so I thought that I'd share that with you. And if you want to do the original look, it'll look like this. It's super similar, it's just slightly more work, so you can totally do that. I've just been a little bit lazy. And this sweater is super easy. It takes like 6 to 8 hours for my size, which is about anywhere from like an extra small to a medium. And it's that perfect sweater for the spring and the fall because it's nice and fluffy, it's warm, but it's still breathable, and I just really like the way that the chunky mohair looks. And also, like, who doesn't look good in a big striped sweater? So choosing your size. So the pattern itself will have all of these size charts and all the numbers, and so keep in mind that all of the measurements are when laid flat. So it's when, like, you put the sweater and you lay it on like your bed or table and you just take the measurements like that. So to get like the full circumference, you just need to double all those numbers. And I like to wear a small in this pattern just because I like to be a little bit more oversized, but I cropped a little bit because everything I wear is cropped. And I usually wear anywhere from an extra small to a medium, depending on like what fit I want from a sweater. Now let's talk materials. So you are going to need a 12 and 15 millimeter circular needles, and I like to use a cord of about 24 inches long just because I like to use the magic loop method, and I actually like it when there's a bunch of stitches or almost too many stitches on a circular needle cord, just because it actually makes it easier to knit faster because you don't have to like constantly like reshift all the stitches to be closer in your left needle. But if you're not comfortable with that, you can always get a 16-inch cord, and I actually recommend doing that for your 12 millimeter needles just because you're going to be knitting the neckband and the sleeves with your 12 millimeter needles, and it's important that you're comfortable knitting it that way. You could also use double pointed needles instead. I don't really like to use double pointed needles, but if you're comfortable with that, go for it. You'll also need a crochet hook. It doesn't really matter what size as long as you can crochet with it. And it's not a ton of crochet, it's just provisional cast on. And you're also going to need 4 stitch markers, and make sure that one of them you can tell is the beginning of the round. And you can either make that a different color, you can add another piece of yarn to it, whatever, as long as you can tell that that's the beginning of the round. I actually typically use like Cocoa Knit big stitch markers, the jumbo stitch markers, and for the beginning of the rounds I use some of my old rings because they're like rose gold, and so I can definitely tell that that's the beginning of the round. Now for materials, it is a little bit tricky because I like to hold strands together for this pattern, but the actual pattern for this is actually written so that it's for a single strand of yarn. So in the pattern, if you are going to be holding it double, in the original, if it says that you need about 280 meters of your color A, if you're holding yarn double, that means you're going to be doing about 560 meters of that yarn. Yeah, it's tricky trying to figure out how much yarn you need when you're holding it double. It gets easier with practice. I promise that it's worth it because I actually really like the way that it looks when you hold yarn double, especially with mohair, because It gives you that fluffy, airy look. And if you wanted to make this pattern with a lace weight mohair, that's trickier. I recommend doing anything from a 6 to 8 strands held together with the lace weight. I can't promise how it'll turn out, but I think it'll be gorgeous either way. My best recommendation is, if you're playing around with like what type of yarn you're using, definitely knit a gauge swatch. So the gauge for this pattern is 8 stitches by 10 rows on 15mm needles, and I really recommend knitting that gauge swatch just to make sure that you like the way that the fabric turns out with your materials. Because I would hate for you to knit a sweater and then realize that you don't really like how it turns out because it's either too loose or it's too thick. Please knit a gauge swatch. It's just good knitting hygiene. I don't always do it, but I'm telling you that you should do it. So without further ado, let's get into the pattern. So you're going to start with the top because it is a top-down sweater. And it's a little bit subtle, but this is a folded over collar. So you're going to be doing a provisional cast on. So you're going to take your crochet hook and scrap yarn, and you're going to provisionally cast on stitches. Okay, so here we are. We're going to take our yarn and we're going to put it to the side because we're actually going to start with our scrap yarn. So first we're going to create a slip knot, and that's our crochet hook. I'm using about a 5mm needle because, again, doesn't really matter. I guess it's a 5mm hook. So I created a slip knot, place it on the crochet hook, going to single chain crochet a few stitches. And sorry if this is the right terminology, I am not a crocheter. That's on my list. So then once we've chained a few stitches, we are going to wrap it around our 12mm needle, and we are just going to single chain crochet around the 12mm needle. And this is a bit tricky. So you're going to pull the yarn through the loop, you're going to wrap the yarn around the back again, and you're just going to continue to do this. And this is how you do provisional cast on. And you're just going to do this for as many stitches as you need for your size. Once you've casted on all your stitches, you are just going to create a tail again. So you're just going to single chain crochet for a bit. And I actually like to make this one longer just to denote that this is the end, the tail end of the provisional cast on. And then you're just going to cut your yarn and pass the tail through. Once the stitches are casted on, you're going to knit one row with your color A. So now I'm just going to take my color A and wrap it around the needle and just knit as normal. And I'm just knitting across the row. Now you're going to join in the round, and you're going to place your beginning of the round stitch marker just to show the beginning of the round. How many times can I say beginning of the round? So you're going to want to make sure that your stitches aren't twisted, and here's where I actually like to use the magic loop method just because the first row is usually the hardest to join in the round, and it can get kind of messy with all the strands of yarn you're working with, but you'll figure it out. Just be careful and make sure your stitches aren't twisted. So to join in the round, I like to take one stitch from the left needle and then pull one stitch from the right needle over it. It's a little bit hard to see with this dark mohair, but just that's what I did. Then I placed the beginning of the round marker and I continue to knit in the round. And now you're going to knit 6 rows or 8. I actually do 8 because I like the stripes to be a little bit bigger and it adds length in a subtle way. You can also just add more stripes, but for some reason I just like to do 8 rows now instead. That's just something that I found that I like to do in this modified pattern. You're going to knit 6 rows of stockinette, and that's just knitting because you're knitting in the round. And then you're going to do 1 row of purls. And the purls is just because it gives it a nice, neat fold over. And if you've ever noticed that trying to do like a fold over with like all knits, it doesn't have like a clean wear area place to fold over. So if you add those purls, it gives it that nice fold over. And then you're going to knit 6 or 8 more rows of stockinette. Now you're going to be doing your join. You're going to be binding, seaming the collar together. And so you're going to need another set of needles, and you can totally use your 15mm needles because you should have that, but you could also use anything that's smaller. It might be easier to pick up the stitches if you use a smaller set of needles. It's knit loose, so it should be pretty forgiving. And so you're going to unzip those provisionally casted on stitches, and you're going to place them on your other set of needles. Okay, so I have my smaller set of needles here. I'm using 8mm in this case, and I'm going to take the longer tail, which indicates the end of the provisional casted on stitches, and I'm just going to unzip it. And it's kind of tricky. I chose kind of sticky yarn, to just unravel it. I have long nails, so it's kind of easier and harder to unpick stitches. And you're just going to pull it loose and I think I got stuck here. It's the yarn. It's better to use a smooth yarn for your scrap yarn. Hold on, I have to go cut it, I think. Okay, so I got it, I had to cut it. And so now we're going to pick up the provisionally casted on stitches, and it's kind of hard to see, sorry, it's dark mohair, but you're going to pick up the leg of the provisionally casted on stitch, and you can always just unravel / pull out the provisional cast on, and then you'll see the bare exposed loop, but I actually like to pick up the legs of the stitches first and then unravel / unwind, unzip. And so I'll pick up a few legs and then I'll unzip a bit. And this is just to make sure that I'm on the right track. And you're just going to do this for all of the stitches. So once you have all these stitches on both sets of needles, you are just going to fold in the neckline, and you want to make sure that the knit side is shown. And so I'm just prepping here, and so it might be a little tricky, but you gotta fold it in. You have to like thread the needles through the neckline a bit, and you really want to make sure that your stitches aren't twisted, so hopefully things lined up as they should. And you're going to place a beginning of the round marker as well. And it's tricky. It takes a lot of maneuvering. It's doable though. I've done this a few times. It's worth it. So you're going to pick up a stitch from the live stitches and a stitch from the cast on, and you're going to take your color B here. And that's how you're going to start seaming things together. This is when your color B comes in. And you're just going to wrap your color B yarn around the stitch, the needle, and you're going to pull it through both stitches. And you're just going to continue that. One stitch from the live stitches and one stitch from the cast on. You're going to wrap your yarn, and you're just going to continue to do this until you have no stitches left. And that's provisional cast on, and that's how you make a folded neckline. Now you're going to switch to your 15mm needles if you haven't already, and you're going to set up these stitch markers. So you are going to knit the stitches for the front, place a stitch marker, knit the stitches for the sleeve, place a stitch marker, knit the stitches for the back, place a stitch marker, knit the stitches for the sleeve, and place your beginning of the round marker into the row again. And so now you've set up the sections for all of your increases, and this is where you're going to slowly add length and stitches so that you can make a sweater. So take your 15mm needles, and you're going to knit these stitches for the front and then place a stitch marker. And you're going to be knitting in color B here because you're just setting up. And it's kind of tricky to work with mohair, but it gets easier, I promise. So I've knit the stitches for the front, and now I'm going to place a stitch marker, and now I'm going to do the same for the sleeve, the back, and the other sleeve. And now you're going to be doing an increase row, so I'm going to show you how you do a make one left and a make one right. First we'll do a make one left, which is a left leaning increase. We are going to take the bar between the stitches using our left needle, picking it from the front to the back. Then we're going to knit through the back loop, and then continue to knit, and that's your make one left. Now we'll do a make one right, which is a right leaning increase. Now for our right leaning increase, we're going to pick up that same bar between the stitches. We're going to go from the back to the front. And we're going to knit this stitch normally, and then we're going to continue to knit. Now you'll just be alternating between increase rows and knit rows. So you're going to be slowly adding stitches and length to the sweater until you have enough stitches for the entire body. And keep in mind that as you're adding all of these increases and knit rows, you're also going to be switching between your color A and your color B rows every 6 or 8 rows. And so you might notice that when you're knitting in the round and you're switching and you're doing stripes, you might notice a jog, which is like a slight step between the beginning of the round and the last stitch of the round. And so this happens because there's no clear difference between the beginning of the round and the end of the round when you're knitting in the round, in the round, in the round, in the round. And so to clean that up, it's actually super simple. So when you're switching between color A and color B, or color B to color A, you're going to slip the very first stitch of the round, and you're just going to place it onto your right needles, and then you're going to knit in your new color for the entire rest of the row. And this will actually take care of the jog. Super simple, and it's almost too simple to make this problem go away, but it works. Now you're just going to do increases and knit rows until you reach the indicated number of stitches. Then you're going to divide the stitches for the sleeve from the stitches from the body. And so you're going to knit the stitches for the body, you're going to place stitches for the sleeve on a scrap piece of yarn, then you're going to knit the stitches for the back, then you're going to place the rest of the stitches for the sleeve on another scrap piece of yarn. And from now on, you're going to only be working on the body. You'll pick up the sleeves later. So we have our scrap piece of yarn, and we have a tapestry needle to help us. And you're just going to thread the scrap piece of yarn through the tapestry needle. And you're going to place that to the side. And you're going to work up to the sleeve section. And then you're going to place those stitches for the sleeves on the scrap piece of yarn. So first we got to work up to it though. So now we've finished the body, and we're going to place our stitch marker to the side, take our scrap yarn, and just thread the scrap yarn through these stitches and take them off the needle. And so we're just going to do that. We're going to thread our needle through and just take them off the needle. And you're going to place all these stitches for the sleeve and that sleeve section onto the scrap piece of yarn. And once we're done, we are going to just tie our scrap yarn like so. And then we're going to join these stitches for the body together. And make sure you keep that stitch marker there because we're going to continue to do our body increases. So we need to divide the front from the back. And then you'll just repeat that for the other sleeve. So here you'll just continue to do increases and adding length to your sweater until it reaches the length that you want it to. I really recommend just trying it on as you go just to see if you like it that way. Once you've reached the appropriate length that you want it to be, this is where I got lazy, and in the pattern it has a nice like fold over. So you insert elastic so that it fits you, like it hugs your body at the bottom. But I've stopped doing that because I ran out of elastic at one point. So what I like to do is I actually like to just cast off loosely in stockinette for the bottom. And if you're using a non-mohair yarn, you might find that it curls up because there's no ribbing to keep it in place. You could always block it to make that go away, or you could always add ribbing instead. It's totally up to you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. But yeah, I like to just do a nice stockinette cast off because it's mohair and it adds a little bit of structure because it's not super stretchy. And I just didn't want to do pearls. Now that we finished the body, we're now going to go back to the sleeves. And so you're going to take those stitches that you left on a scrap piece of yarn for the sleeves, and you're going to place them back onto your 15mm needles. So now we have our stitches on hold, and we're going to take our 15mm needles. We're just going to pick those stitches back up. And that means we're just going to thread our needle through those loops. And once we're done, we're just going to cut the scrap yarn and pull it out, and then we'll pick up the stitches for the underarm. So once we've picked up those stitches, we are going to insert our needle under the underarm, take our yarn, depending on what color you finished on, and you are just going to wrap the yarn around the needle and then pull it through to the other side. And this is how you pick up stitches. And you're going to do that again, insert your needle, wrap your yarn, pull it through, and you're going to place your stitch marker in between the halfway point of those new stitches. And I'm picking up 4 stitches under the underarm here, so I placed it after I picked up 2 stitches. And now you're just going to knit in the round and add length. I do recommend also trying on your sweater as you work on the sleeves, just so you can figure out like what you want it to look like, how long your arms are going to be. Your arms might be longer than mine, they might be shorter than mine. The beauty of making your own sweaters is that you get to customize the length. Once you've added enough length to your sleeves, you're going to do a decrease to make the cuffs. Take your other color. If you ended on a color A, you're going to use color B. If you ended on a color B, you're going to use your color A. You're going to knit 2 together for the entire round. So you're going to knit 2 together through the entire round. You're going to insert your right needle to 2 stitches, wrap your color B yarn, and then you're just going to pull that through both stitches. And that's how you knit 2 together, and we're just decreasing by half for the cuffs. And yep, just do that for the entire round. Once you've decreased to the appropriate number of stitches, you're going to switch to your 12mm needles, and this is another modification that I've done to the pattern. I just like to do a cuff of pure stockinette and then I just bind off because I'm lazy. The pattern's a little bit different. If you have any other questions, let me know. So you're going to switch to your 12mm needles, and you're just going to knit 6 or 8 rows of stockinette, and then you're just going to cast off in stockinette. Because this is a cuff, you want to make sure that it isn't too tight. And so I actually like to use my 15mm needles to cast off here because it gives it a little bit more stretch and it makes it loose. You can also just knit really loose on the cast off with your 12mm needles, or you can also do a tubular bind off. Up to you. I find that using the 15mm needles is the fastest and it's easy. Now, the final finishing touch, you might notice that there's a gap when you cast off between the first stitch and the last stitch, and so this is how I like to clean that up using your cast off tail. So you can kind of see the gap here. It's subtle, but it is there. So you're going to take your tapestry needle and you're just going to take your cast off tail, thread it through the needle, and you're going to take the top V of your first stitch and you're going to pull the cast off tail through. And then you're going to do the exact same thing with your last stitch. So go to the top V and pull your cast off tail through. And then you're going to weave in all your ends, and that's how you clean up the cast off. Then you're just going to do the exact same thing for your other sleeve, and you're going to weave in all your ends. And then your sweater's done. And that is the entire pattern. Hopefully that made sense to you. I'm sorry if all the modifications got confusing, but that's just how I like to modify my own pattern to make it into this nice sweater that I'm wearing now. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment or email me. Thank you so much for supporting me and my patterns. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day and happy knitting. See ya. Oh, and I forgot to mention that if you aren't looking for a super chunky knit, there's also the Better Days Light Sweater, which is a sweater that's knit on 6 and 8mm needles, and it'll be super similar to how you knit the Better Days sweater, so you can also use this tutorial.